Hey, everybody, and welcome to Awakenings, the Archetypal Astrology podcast. My name is Jon Waller. I'll be your host for this, our second episode. I'm an archetypal astrologer living in the southwest of England in Exeter. I'm here with Renn Butler. Renn, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Today's January 30th, and I am here with my partner, Allison. We're in Malaki, Mexico, and we'll just hope the internet holds out for us.
Thanks for that, Renn. So later on in today's episode, I'm going to do my best to provide you with a lot of information and insight as regards to the upcoming world transit conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, which is starting in March, and it's going to be a major astrological event for the coming years. Before that, me and Renn are just going to dive in with a rough and ready analysis of the major transit events of the coming month. So let's just dive in. So I guess just a few orienting comments with regards to the longer lasting transits that are kind of forming the archetypal backdrop of everything else that we'll talk about. A big thing is this wonderful conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. And then also there's a trine going on between Uranus and Pluto, which will be happening for about the next 7 or 8 years. Renn, do you want to say anything about those, the kind of the general field of the astrology that we're in at the moment?
Yeah, the Uranus trine Pluto that you were referring to kicked in about August of 2022, and I believe goes till 2032. And this is a wonderful, powerful, evolutionary and revolutionary energy. I'm talking about the inner revolution of consciousness. The nature of the trine, the 120-degree flowing alignment between Uranus and Pluto for the next 8 years or so, is that people can open to these energies and the healing, cathartic, awakening qualities that they help us access, but in a more gentle, smooth, and flowing way. So it's wonderful to have that.
Yeah. I guess worth pointing out as well, that it's not long since we sort of got to the end of the square between Uranus and Pluto, which lasted from 2007 right up until about the beginning of 2020. So, a lot of the highly charged social issues, the kind of rapid acceleration of kind of technological developments, also are manifestations of that Uranus-Pluto energy. So I guess something we can hope for with this trine is that some of the more out of control energies that we saw, really shaking up the apple cart in that period of 2007 to 2020 might continue in a more manageable form. Something to hope for anyway.
Yes, let's hope so. I think in many ways that Uranus-Pluto square you were referring to, John, continued through early 2021, including the January 6th attempted insurrection. And yes, I agree. Let's hope that some of the fanatical extremist sides of both Uranus and Pluto will be mitigated during this flowing trine. However, remember that the last time we had Uranus trine Pluto was in the 20s, which is referred to as the roaring 20s. This can be a period of excess in many ways, and I think there will be some extremism will continue. But overall, it's a very organizing transit. Trines tend to bring things back into equilibrium, into balance. And I think as the psychedelic renaissance continues, and especially if MDMA is legalized this year as a psychiatric prescription medication in many countries, and people begin to have an opportunity to do that deep healing work, I think that that'll be a major quantum leap for the healing of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of quantum leaps, you know, another positive indicator with all this is the fact that so close to the beginning of this trine, you know, this Uranus-Pluto chapter that we're in, we have this conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus, which, you know, hopefully is bringing some more of the benevolent and positive outcomes of the Uranus-Pluto energy, helping us to see the positive side of things.
Yeah, well, I like the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction a lot, and I agree with what you said, bringing out the positive side of the Uranus-Pluto. Jupiter-Uranus, of course, is associated with quantum leaps, sudden, unexpected resolutions of difficult situations, positive outcomes, opening of horizons, new opportunities, and many people will connect with people this year and beginning of new creative partnerships. And this is just one of those years people will look back at as kind of a golden year, you know, and the second half of last year as well.
That's great. So I guess looking at the astrology that's kind of more specific to this month, this is the chart for the 1st of February. Obviously, something that stands out is this stellium of planets kind of towards the end of Capricorn and the early degrees of Aquarius. We're kind of saying goodbye to the conjunction between Sun and Pluto right now, and that energy is somewhat being exchanged for the arrival of Mercury and Mars conjoining Pluto in the sky. The last few conjunctions and squares and oppositions between Mars and Pluto have represented quite tumultuous and turbulent, difficult times in the geopolitical sense. The last hard aspect between Mars and Pluto, you know, presided over the events in Israel on October 7th and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia was also took place under a Mars-Pluto conjunction. So, you know, like I say, most of us don't have the, you know, don't have the agency or the power to influence such events, but just something to watch out for. Anything that you want to reflect on with regards to Mars-Pluto or the Mars-Mercury-Pluto conjunction that we're seeing at the beginning of this month?
Yes. Well, you know, this began about the last week of January as well, and it certainly coincides with the escalation of violence around the Gulf and, you know, in the Middle East, and let's hope that calms down. These are very forceful yang energies, Mars and Pluto. In deep self-exploration, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, or Grof breathwork, holotropic breathwork, these are very positive influences for vigorous verbal catharsis. Mercury adds the element of the verbal channel, so it's great for yelling, screaming, blaspheming, cursing, making inhuman animal sounds, just allowing the aggressive energies in the psyche, a large percentage of which are from the dynamic stage of birth labor, what Grof calls the third perinatal matrix, or BPM3. There's a finite amount of that in the psyche. I think that the most any of us can do to help the world situation is to get in touch with that reservoir of aggression within ourselves and express it in an appropriate time and place. A soundproof room where we can yell, where there's no time limit. And, you know, anytime we feel angry, that's a good thing to seek out, even a parked car or in the woods. These can be quite angry, confrontive energies. It's better not to aim them at other people. but to unilaterally withdraw from aggressive confrontations and aim those energies at transcendence. The influence of Mercury can also at best lend itself to forceful, effective communication, intense study, deeply penetrating insights. People may be asking questions about the sources of aggression in the human psyche. And I would recommend Grof's books, Beyond the Brain, LSD Psychotherapy, Psychology of the Future, some suggestions. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Renn. So feel free to stop me, Renn, if there's any days that I'm kind of skipping over that you think something important should be looked at.
Okay, well, I'll just mention also
Mm-hmm.
the Venus trine Jupiter that was in effect for the last 8 or 10 days, maybe in January and certainly the beginning of February. Venus trine Jupiter is a wonderfully charming, friendly energy. There's a natural grace. It helps for people to connect with higher values in mind, Jupiterian higher purposes, values. And this is a bit of an antidote to the more conflictual side of the Mercury, Mars, Pluto. It can help to smooth things out.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, as that moves, out of orb with Jupiter, it moves into orb with Uranus. So in a way, we can see that like this conjunction of Venus and Mars is kind of acting in a field with the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus, like throughout the first week of February, at the very least.
Yeah, yes, it certainly is. I mean, I love that. I mean, the Venus, Mars, Pluto, which kicks in around February 8th, possibly a bit earlier, and then these nice flowing trines to Jupiter, Uranus. These can intensify sexual feelings. The influence of Uranus could coincide with sexual breakthroughs, healing of sexual wounds. It's great for dancing, fun parties, active forms of fun, and so on.
Something that a lot of astrological folks will be paying attention to is the beginning of the new lunar calendar. The Lunar New Year is determined, it falls on the second new moon after the winter solstice. So Lunar New Year this year will be, very, very Aquarian or very Uranian, very Promethean in nature. We've got Sun conjunct Moon square Uranus in the sign of Aquarius, also with Mercury and Pluto. So, yeah, a lot of talk in the astrology world about Pluto's entry into Aquarius. I guess from a archetypal astrology perspective, perhaps the thing that we would pay attention to more is the trine between Pluto and Uranus. But this is another, the sun and moon being conjunct, square Uranus will be another moment when the psyche will be open to those Promethean energies, urges towards eccentricism and individuality. Yeah, perhaps a good time for setting intentions with regards to the year ahead. If you haven't gotten sick of that already, um, and yeah, any thoughts about this particular day, Renn?
Yeah, a great time to pull out some of your wilder hats, maybe from the past, and just wear them like nothing's out of the ordinary. See what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a good day for a party to me. Mars conjunct Venus, And Pluto with those very Dionysian energies. Yeah, Moon and Sun square Uranus, Jupiter conjunct Uranus, all good indicators that some fun and unusual activities could be going on at that time. So you mentioned around the 14th. So I'll bring up the chart for the 14th. So I would imagine that what you have your eye on is the Moon getting involved with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction.
Yes, this is fantastic. Look at that amazing stellium in Taurus there. 14th, 15th, and 16th will be unusually conducive to dramatic emotional openings and awakenings, healing of family issues. Great time to plan an inner journey, all other things considered, but follow the usual safeties, proper set and setting, having sitters, and so on. But this alone is almost a guarantee for the average person of a positive outcome if they follow the proper set and setting that I referred to. It's a kind of a wild card of breakthrough of Grof's basic perinatal matrix 4. People can have connections with the emancipatory side of the feminine. They can heal issues around the feminine side of their beings. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. Perhaps also worth pointing out that if people are feeling called to do a session of some kind on that day, but can't do that particular day or one of those 3 days, we also have the opposition at the beginning of February, where the Moon on the 2nd of February will oppose Jupiter and Uranus.
Yeah, also great.
So yeah, still a very strong activation of those same energies that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
From something that I had my eye on, from the 18th to the end of the month and slightly beyond, this Sun conjunct Saturn in the sky as a world transit. Might be a shift in feeling towards the end of the month, particularly if this Sun Saturn conjunction is hitting one of your personal planets, your Sun or Moon, or maybe your Saturn or Venus. Could be some feelings of constriction, meeting with criticism, encountering different kinds of obstacles, feelings of one's identity kind of coming under fire or being seen as inadequate in one way or another. The best way to work with Sun Saturn energies is to just accept the necessity of incremental progress and learn to celebrate small victories. Any thoughts about how to navigate Sun Saturn towards the end of the month there, Renn?
Yeah, that's well said. I think from about the 19th of February on, Mercury joins that, especially since the Sun is at the midpoint of Mercury and Saturn. And one of the ways we can work with these energies is to channel them into focus study. It's great for editing. It's great for looking at the details of things, building on tradition, incremental study. It can help us to omit unnecessary words, which is the essence of good writing. Just say what you mean in the clearest possible way. People can write not without success during a transit like this. Yeah, from about the 22nd on, as Mercury gets closer to the Saturn, you may notice some difficulties in communication. People can interpret things that other people say in a more negative way than they intended. People's critical faculties can be sharpened, which is good. It helps us to get to the granular level, pixel level, and see what's not working. That's beneficial for problem solving, but we may also see the cup as half empty in certain ways. So those are some of the expressions of those archetypes.
And just to add that the full moon on the 24th of February might be a day when those, if those themes are coming up, if they're things that you're feeling, they might be felt particularly poignantly or personally around the time of that full moon, which of course is the full moon is when the moon is opposite the sun. So obviously at this time it's also opposite Mercury and Saturn as well.
Yeah, and for people who have found the benefit in introspection, and remember, Jung believed deeply in the value of introspection, and Grof as well. We have to spend time staying in a sustained way with our feelings and just scanning what's happening inside of our bodies, our sensations and our emotions, and just staying with it without trying to change it. These transits can be very helpful for that. I mean, look at that sun, moon, and Mercury all lined up with Saturn. Saturn can close many doors in our lives, but it always leaves the door of introspection open. And for people who like to do bite-sized journeys, sessions, this can be a serious day, maybe not the most glamorous day, but we can get some serious inner work done at this time. Just remember, this is all in the backdrop of the exciting Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and that very passionate Venus-Mars-Pluto square Jupiter. There can be a lot of sexual feelings coming up again, good for expression in dance, in active forms of fun, parties, also dynamic art forms. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think that was probably the last date of the month that I had down as particularly interesting or significant. Is there anything else you want to touch on, Renn?
Yeah, I would go up to February 29. And that's leap year, right?
I forgot there even was a February 29.
So I guess this is a leap year, so there'll be a few 80-year-olds turning 20 this year. Always fun. And I was looking at this approaching Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Over the next 3 years, we will talk a lot about this in awakenings and specific times when that's going to be accentuated, more problematic. We'll be sharing a lot of good, helpful, and positive information about how to deal with these energies and navigate them. And we'll be releasing one of these on the 1st of every month. So I hope you can tune into those. Please click the subscription button if you like this and share this with friends. Write any comments afterward. We'd really appreciate hearing from you. But it looks like February 29th could possibly be the day when this Saturn-Neptune begins, though Rick Tarnas makes it so clear these are not like light switches that turn on and off. It's more like waveforms of probability, and the manifestations will flow into being right around this point or the following several weeks in March. But the quadruple stellium with Sun and Mercury in between the Saturn-Neptune will increase the orb or the allowable operative range of the Saturn-Neptune, bring it together as a field. This is when we need to gear down a little bit in our spiritual lives, maybe stop taking undue risks with higher dosages of psychedelics. Better to think about bite-sized sessions. If we're fairly healthy emotionally, we don't have serious emotional problems, Probably things will continue more or less the same, but we never know in principle when a more challenging session can emerge, inner material can emerge. And Saturn-Neptune could possibly be one of those times. It looks like the Saturn-Neptune, however, does come within the 15-degree orb that Rick talks about for outer planet conjunctions and oppositions around March 22nd. But this will certainly be an early taste of it for many of us. I look forward to unpacking some of the meanings of the Saturn-Neptune complex with everybody, and be sure to tune in for our podcast on March 1st. That's when it will really seem relevant. So wishing everyone a wonderful month. Thanks for tuning in, and wishing you the very best.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Renn. Thank you, as always, for your time and your wisdom and all of your many insights. I guess having landed there at the foot of the looming conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, probably a good time to dive in a little more detail. So as you can see, the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune is going to take place starting in March of this year and going on until May of 2027. Now, at times, because of retrogrades, it will look maybe to the untrained eye, looking at the chart, as though these two are out of orb, no longer in conjunction. In the archetypal way of doing things, we consider that once the transit has come into orb for the first time, that transit is then considered operational until the final time that the faster moving planet moves out of the separating orb. So this conjunction the dates for this conjunction may look a little bit long to some people, but that's using the orbs that Richard Tarnas suggests, which is 15 degrees on either side. And using that methodology, this is the duration of Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we come to. So I'll start by just listing a few of the overarching themes of Saturn and Neptune when they come together. So, loss of connection or unity and feelings of abandonment. Conflict between spirituality and material reality. There can be questions and confusion about reality. The need for hard work and groundedness in spirituality and critiques of contemporary spirituality, as well as awareness of the insufficiency or problematic dimensions of organized religion, such as fundamentalism or the undue reification of mystical experiences. In the more political or social realm, there can be people who meet oppression with stubbornly peaceful resistance. There can be strongly held values of compassion and humility, a deep commitment to morality, or suffering and imprisonment for noble causes. So I'll just give a kind of series of historical examples of these kinds of phenomena, featuring people who were born with Saturn Neptune and the events that occurred in their lives, which also took place under hard aspects for the most part between Saturn and Neptune. So starting with suffering and imprisonment for noble causes, no doubt Nelson Mandela is probably the first person to spring to mind for many of you. So he was born in 1918 with the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. And during the square of 1964, he made his famous "An ideal for which I am prepared to die" speech. I won't read the whole quote, but yeah. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. So there's a kind of nobility, a kind of gravitas, a kind of implacable commitment to the cause of peaceful coexistence in this case. During the conjunction of 1990, we see the continuation of this story. Friends, comrades, and fellow South Africans, says Mandela on the day of his release, I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Your tireless and heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands. Need I say more? This is the essence of Saturn-Neptune. I stand here not as a prophet, but as a humble servant. So at the same time that Mandela was making his An Ideal for Which I Am Prepared to Die speech a little beforehand, but under the same square between Saturn and Neptune, Martin Luther King, who was born with the trine in 1929, of course, was making his famous I Have a Dream speech. Here's a few quotes that highlight the Saturn-Neptune dimensions of that speech. I particularly like, continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Very Saturn-Neptune. A few confronting images in the next slide, just to give you a bit of warning. So this is the Buddhist crisis, as it was called, in Vietnam during the same square between Saturn and Neptune, where these now infamous images originated, and you can clearly see the stubborn commitment to peaceful resistance against implacable forces of oppression. This is the Buddhist community in Vietnam struggling against the then mostly Catholic government. So here's David Hasselhoff, the inexplicable hero of the German people, born in 1952 with the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune. He, of course, performed on the Berlin Wall on the day that the border came down. You know, we probably associate the crumbling of the Soviet Union more with the conjunction between Neptune and Uranus, which began at the end of the 80s and lasted through much of the 90s. But yeah, many of the more concrete events of that process occurred, appropriately enough, during the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the end of the 80s. In this case, we can see Neptune acting on Saturn as it dissolved the Saturnian boundaries, which had become ossified and harmful. Another way that we can see the two archetypes combining, another different way, is to see the establishment of enduring structures. So that's Saturn for peaceful coexistence with nature and ecological conservation. So the founding of Greenpeace occurred in 1971 during the opposition between Saturn and Neptune. Fun fact is also that this was when the first rainbow gathering took place. For those of you who know what a rainbow gathering is, kind of off-grid, back to basics, hippie gatherings that still to this day take place all over the world, has turned out to be a very enduring structure for Neptunian purposes. So this is the author Salman Rushdie, author of the Satanic Verses. He was born with the sextile. A nice quote from him here that expresses one of the more difficult and problematic experiences of Saturn-Neptune. From the beginning, men used God to justify the unjustifiable. So Rushdie clearly finds Neptune, or the sacred, or in this case, God, to be problematic, and is very much oriented towards unpacking and understanding the problems with religion. During the conjunction in 1989 between Saturn and Neptune, the supreme leader of Iran issued a fatwa calling for the murder of Rushdie and put a $3 million bounty on his head, which seems unbelievable, but it really did happen. The fatwa was rescinded in 1998 under the following square. So this is Douglas Adams, who was born with the conjunction. His conjunction, I believe, is also trine or possibly opposite Uranus. So you can definitely see the influence of Uranus in the technological and humorous inflection of Saturn-Neptune here. Just a quote from his famous character Marvin the Paranoid Android, an immortal robot who's less than happy about his fate. The first 10 million years were the worst, said Marvin. And then the second 10 million years, they were the worst too. The third 10 million years I didn't enjoy at all. After that, I went into a bit of a decline. Everlasting, infinite suffering. Just a funny one, really. So here are some images that I've made with AI. The rest of the images in this presentation are ones that I've made with AI, I believe, for the most part, if not all of them. These two are just designed to show two different sides of what can come up when journeying under Saturn-Neptune influences. There can be a deep stillness, a kind of deep and lasting sense of peace. But Saturn-Neptune also has to do with the transition from BPM 1 to BPM 2. So that is when we go from a kind of ideal situation in the womb to the onset of labor, when the chemical balance in the womb changes and the environment becomes toxic. When people relive these experiences, they can be associated with feelings of abandonment, betrayal, loneliness. We can really feel the cold in sessions. Nonetheless, these are important experiences to have. In many respects, the transition from Neptune to Saturn is the transition from spirit to physical form. It's associated with the process of incarnation itself. So it's a very deep part of our spiritual reality, worth exploring in its own right, even if some of those experiences are not necessarily pleasant. To give more a sense of this, I'm just going to read one of my poems. Is it really so? We are no longer one. The memory of us slips as through fingers or an hourglass. I feel you still, phantom limb, you, the mountain, I, amnesiac, wandering, confused among your foothills. No longer your peak and slopes, nor your caverns, nor your timelessness am I. All that is now mine is to wander, cataloguing every fractured piece, until I might remember us. So to put that a bit more explicitly, the transition from BPM 1 to BPM 2, or the combination of Saturn and Neptune, can involve loneliness, abandonment, guilt, shame, resentment, sorrow, and rejection. Now, we can benefit immensely by working through these emotions. These are good experiences to have in psychedelic sessions and medicine work. Sitters should be aware, though, that journeyers may need extra emotional support during these transits, as positive spiritual experiences may just be a little harder to access. As well as struggling to establish a connection with the divine, journeyers may also have the difficult experience of attaining unitive states of consciousness, being gifted with moments of grace, melted ecstasy, and bliss, only to then lose them and be dropped back into BPM 2. This might happen again and again. It's also possible that the final part of sessions might be more complicated under these transits. Sitters should not take one breakthrough into positive feeling as a sign that the session is necessarily resolving. Sitters can also help by agreeing in advance to stay longer than usual if needed. So the theme of imprisonment that we saw with Nelson Mandela can also be a part of psychedelic experience, inner experience. It can come through in a few different ways. Journeyers can experience blockages that last for a long time, which can feel punitive and unfair in nature, utterly futile and cruel, as though being wrongly convicted and punished for the crimes of another. There can be long periods of encountering shame and guilt for past actions in one's personal life that deepen into BPM-2 experiences of being stuck or imprisoned. Or, on the deepest level, the journeyer can feel as though by their suffering, they are consuming the suffering of the earth and cosmos itself, performing the ultimate act of compassion, making right the sins and brutality of all humanity. So, kind of Christ consciousness type of experience. Something to note is that many people have religious trauma, and it may not be because they've been abused. It may not be because they've been hurt in a direct way. It might be, and that's definitely something that should be taken into account and brought into the open and worked through where possible. But there's also a kind of splitting that happens in the psyche when we're raised with a certain set of beliefs which turn out not to be true, or which turn out not to be true for us, or which turn out to be harmful to us, to hold those beliefs. And then we have to go through the process of leaving them behind, abandoning them, finding a new worldview, building a new world from scratch, is what that can feel like, especially when it happens to us during younger years. So if journeyers have material to work through that involves difficult previous experiences with religion, it is likely to emerge during sessions under Saturn-Neptune transits. This is a good thing. We want to be able to work through this material, but preparation sessions should include some inquiry into the journeyer's previous experience with religion. Now, because most people who are traumatized by religion, not all, but most people in the Western world who are traumatized by religion are typically traumatized by their experience with patriarchal religion, Abrahamic religions. That's not to say that there isn't beauty and great wisdom in the Abrahamic religious traditions. Of course there is. But with that said, male sitters in particular may need to be sensitive to any wounding inflicted by patriarchal figures, and be aware that the journeyer may see them as oppressors at times and require calm reassurance. It takes a certain type of person to be able to calmly absorb the projections of people under the influence of strong doses of powerful psychedelics. But that might come up, and it can be a very healing experience for the journeyer to go through. But we as sitters need to be ready to hold that when it lands on us. So questions and confusion about reality. This can be a general theme with Saturn-Neptune transits. It's just worth bearing in mind if we're planning to take powerful mind-altering substances, or to empower or encourage other people to do that when Saturn and Neptune are dynamically constellated, as in this world transit conjunction, we're bringing those powerful psychedelic substances into an atmosphere where questions and confusion about reality are already present. So just worth bearing that in mind, in my opinion. Saturn is the reality principle. That is, Saturn would have you believe that the material world is the ultimate final reality and the only level of being, and the only level of being that is worth focusing your attention on. From the Saturnian perspective, Neptune is the archetype of delusion, escapism, obfuscation. It's best avoided, ignored, and denied. But on its own terms, Neptune is the governing principle of an order of reality that is altogether higher and in some sense prior to the physical one, which is commonly the focus of our attention. So from Neptune's perspective, it is the Saturnian brand of reality that comes with scare quotes. It's highly questionable, even comical, that human beings place such emphasis upon it. This is a rhetoric that we hear time and time again in different spiritual traditions. So during Saturn-Neptune transits, people may be going through a process of changing the way they perceive reality, wrestling with the notions of incarnation and reincarnation, trying to understand suffering as a fundamental property of existence and the ultimate uncertainty of life's true nature. This can be a rather difficult and lonely process, especially if the person lacks the philosophical and spiritual frameworks through which to process these thoughts and feelings, and if they lack spiritual companions who can understand what they're going through. Ultimately, these are good processes to go through that are in service to our growth and development. It's good to become disillusioned. Sometimes seeing clearly is about the removal of illusions, but that's not always a straightforward matter to tell which one is the illusion and which one is the reality. How do we bring those things into a kind of harmonious balance? So this is just a fun slide about psychedelic integration under Saturn-Neptune. Problems can occur if there's overemphasis of either archetype. So there can be an overly practical orientation where we're kind of going into psychedelic experiences with a psychological shopping list of improvements, seeking very practical insights that we can immediately implement. This is probably not advisable. Might be okay, but probably what's better is to adopt a posture of reverent exploration, seeking a deepening of one's relationship to the mysteries, and allowing what will to unfold from that place. Another example of how Saturn and Neptune might not play well together can be reification of psychedelic experience. So with Christ consciousness type experience where we're suffering, for the world, for the sake of other people, this can be a deeply meaningful and healing experience, but it would be a mistake to take away from that we are indeed Christ. Or, you are Christ, but you're just not the only one. If you are, then everybody is. There could be a desire to use medicine to escape the mundane world. And we would all do well to remember that the proper role of the medicine is to bring us more deeply into contact with different parts of ourselves, not to escape any parts of ourselves. And then just straightforward disappointment. Sometimes experiencing disappointment in an expanded state of consciousness is what we need to do in order to move forward with whatever it is that we're working through or suffering with. So it can be that we don't have the experience we were hoping for, and that's what we have to integrate. Or it can be that we have a kind of cosmically ordained experience of immense psychedelic disappointment, which itself is the lesson. Either way, Saturn-Neptune demands contemplative practice, patience, hard work, and it requires us to move slowly to arrive at spiritual solutions to serious material problems. Here's a quote from Stan Grof, taken from The Cosmic Game, which was published during the Saturn-Neptune square of 1997 to 2000. What can we gain from moving away from the material plane into transcendental realities? And conversely, what is the value of embracing wholeheartedly the world of everyday reality? Many spiritual systems define the goal of the spiritual journey as dissolution of personal boundaries and reunion with the divine. However, Those people who have actually experienced in their inner explorations identification with absolute consciousness realize that defining the final goal of the spiritual journey as the experience of oneness with the supreme principle of existence involves a serious problem. They become aware of the fact that the undifferentiated absolute consciousness or void represents not only the end of the spiritual journey, but also the source and beginning of creation. The divine is the principle offering reunion for the separated, but also the agent responsible for the division and the separation of the original unity. In the terminology of the Kabbalah, people need God, and God needs people. So to me, that quote from Stan Grof really gets at the heart of the Saturn-Neptune complex. You know, it emphasizes the fundamentality of the splitting of consciousness as a kind of foundational cosmological process. So, not something to be avoided in psychedelic explorations, something to be welcomed, to be embraced, but nonetheless, something that will probably present some challenges for people as they encounter it more fully, more deeply. Ultimately, I believe that it's partly by having these types of experiences in sessions of deep self-exploration that we can learn how to balance the needs and the priorities of these two very different takes on reality, and bring them into harmonious relationship that can become the foundation of our own inner deep and lasting peace. So just before tying this up, it's worth mentioning that whilst sessions under Saturn-Neptune energies can be challenging, they, as I say, they don't need to be avoided, just approached with a kind of serious mentality. Now, there aren't many combinations of archetypes that constitute what we might think of as a astrological contraindication for psychedelic sessions. You know, Saturn and Neptune might engender a more serious type of experience and require a more grounded and serious approach and energy from us, both as journeyers and facilitators. But it's not a reason in and of itself not to do a session. The only time really that archetypal astrologers would recommend not planning to do a session is if Mars is also involved with Saturn Neptune, particularly if it's involved in hard aspect purely as a world transit. So this is going to happen on several occasions over the next few years when Mars will either be conjunct, opposed, or square the Saturn Neptune conjunction. Because these are relatively short periods of time, it makes sense where possible to avoid high dose sessions, or at least to minimize the risks of psychedelic experience. So I just want to say a few things about how Mars, Saturn, Neptune can show up together. Here's a quote from Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl. They broke their backs lifting Moloch to heaven, pavements, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven, which exists and is everywhere about us. So because Saturn and Neptune can both tend towards passivity and stillness rather than activity, they don't necessarily make the best archetypal environment for Mars to come into. Mars' nature is to activate and catalyze things, preferably without too much resistance, caution, preparation, or reflection, so it can be frustrated by Saturn-Neptune, or it can initiate short-sighted processes that go against the overarching aim of establishing a deep and lasting sense of inner peace through the intentional consuming of suffering. With Mars, Saturn, Neptune, it's harder to accept the validity and utility of suffering, as Mars makes us more reactive and impulsive and less philosophical and thoughtful. Mars can be brought into confluent relationship with both Saturn and Neptune, and its influence in sessions is generally a positive, activating force which helps to get things going, catalyze abreaction, and the parts of the healing process which have to do with physical movement. Journeyers may become angry about their treatment by the divine and adopt an adversarial stance towards their own psychological material. This is not a bad thing 100% of the time, but it is generally better to work towards surrender and acceptance of emerging material. Journeyers may become impatient for the dynamics of a session to shift and develop, which will generally seem to make it harder and extend periods of blockage. Generally speaking, the urge to control events during psychedelic therapy should be de-emphasized as much as possible. Mars-Saturn is a combination which reifies the ego complex, so it might be more difficult for journeyers, however willing they believe themselves to be, to surrender their ego defenses and have spiritual experiences of any kind. People experiencing Mars-Saturn transits can develop a tendency to dig their heels in, get stubborn, and expect the world to change to suit their purposes. In sessions, this kind of attitude can be directed towards the various emerging contents of one's own psyche, or towards transpersonal entities, apparitions, gods, goddesses, or towards the divine itself. Mars-Saturn sees what Neptune has to offer and responds with a firm and assertive no. Days when all three planets are connected, especially connected purely as world transits by square, conjunction, or opposition, might be days when the ego simply wants to keep a hold of its attachments. It might be fine to do a session on these days, but it might also be like going to an expensive restaurant with a stomach bug. You might as well wait for a more opportune time. The metaphor that Renn tends to give here is it's like going camping in the rain. You know, you can have a good time camping in the rain, but if you know it's going to rain and you have the option to choose a different day, you might as well choose a different day. So just to round out this presentation on Saturn Neptune, here are the dates for when Mars will be either conjunct, square, or opposed that world transit of Saturn and Neptune. Just ones to keep in your diary. I'll leave them up there for a second. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to Awakenings, the Archetypal Astrology podcast. Please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. We appreciate that very much. It helps the channel to grow. Feel free to share the episodes with anyone who you think may benefit from the content that we are creating. Let us know what you think in the comments. The next episode will drop on the 1st of March. And for anyone who's interested, my website is www.jonwallercoach.com. That's Jon, Jon, Waller, Waller, coach.com. I do offer various different kinds of astrological readings and coaching. Do reach out if you are interested in working with me. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. See you next time.